Welcome back to the Human Longevity Project. I hope you are able to implement some of the tips mentioned in episode 5. For many people I know, improving circadian rhythm and minimizing EMF have been some of the easiest and most impactful strategies to improve their health. If you missed this episode, you'll definitely want to purchase this series, as there are a ton of resources and tips included in episode 5, along with the full-length interviews and action plan. We'll be changing directions in episode 6 as we looked at the multitude of factors that focus on raising healthy children. The rates of childhood illness have exploded recently in ways that aren't manifesting in societies we visited. What's causing this issue, and how can we give our kids what they need to be healthy and happy? Episode 6 is all queued up and ready to go. Enjoy.
I remember having teachers that, okay, you're in kindergarten, we're going to get you ready for first grade because those are the big kids. Then you go first, second, third. They're always getting you ready for the next thing, really preparing you for college, for when your real life begins. Well, childhood is very important. It is life. It's not preparing for the rest of your life. And so children now play 15 minutes a day. And then they come home and they have homework for 3 hours, or they're on their iPad or playing a video game, which, when I was a kid, TV turned off at a certain time. You couldn't just watch it all the time. So then their circadian rhythms turned off by constantly being in artificial light, and, they're using hand sanitizers, and there's a plug-in in the wall next to them. And so their whole environment has become artificial.
One of my favorite quotes by Krishnamurti is, "It's no sign of health to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society." And what we are expecting of not only ourselves as adults, but certainly of our youth, is that they show no signs that anything is wrong with our educational system, with our family units, with the total fracturing and dissolution of our community networks, with our food supply, with exposure to chemical toxicants everywhere. And because of my success reversing and disappearing these disease labels, I know that they are actually a wise response to something real.
The rates of chronic conditions in children have skyrocketed. I mean, it's an exponential growth. In the 1960s, you had less than 10% of kids with some kind of chronic illness diagnosis. Today, you have more than half. It's 54% of American kids have at least one chronic illness diagnosis. So that's an exponential rate of increase in such a short period of time. And that's all the kids who have diagnoses. And there are many more kids who actually have what I call the soft signs of being impacted and basically not being healthy, but they're not necessarily diagnosed. So these are the kids who have undiagnosed anxiety or insomnia and they can't sleep, or the kids who have food sensitivities and react to the food they're eating, but they don't have a food allergy diagnosis. So I would say, in my estimation, the vast majority of American children have some kind of chronic illness, and that actually extends to the industrialized world. It isn't just the United States, but we're doing the best job of making our kids sick. Because there has been a slow, incremental increase in the number of children that are impacted, we don't see it. We don't see it as the epidemic that it is. So while you can look at discrete epidemics like the epidemic of autism or the epidemic of asthma or the epidemic of ADHD, they're actually all one epidemic. They're the new childhood disorders. And it seems as if they're normal because they're so common.
You look at the most recent autism statistics and it's beyond alarming. The trajectory is something that's just untenable.
And the saddest thing to me is that the default approach to these conditions is just prescribing medication. I mean, that's true for all chronic disease, but it's even more glaring with these behavioral disorders. I think we can all agree it's not natural that kids have these disorders. It's common, but it's not normal. There's a big difference between common and normal. We have to remember that. Behavioral disorders are a direct result of poor diet, exposure to environmental toxins, both in utero and in early childhood development, disrupted gut microbiome, lack of certain nutrients, but sometimes excess of other nutrients. So there are tons of things that have, and if you look in the research, those are all there. I'm not just making this up. I mean, there are studies that support all of these connections, but for some reason, we're not looking.
In this bubble that I live in and I chose to raise my son in, more than half the children in his class had immune dysregulations or gut issues or some sort of diagnoses, and now in their teens suffer with depression. So what's happening that we can say, even in this bubble of an environment, of exposure, of farmers markets, of kids that are going to farm camp, that are playing in the dirt every day, and yet they are having exposures and diagnoses and signs and symptoms that are not what we saw, not what my parents saw. My parents don't understand depression. They weren't exposed to it like that. But what's happened over time that is the reality that we really need to be looking at today?
Kids are just behind the 8 ball, and they're second and third generation behind the 8 ball now, right? So like our grandparents, they had less vaccinations, less medication, more healthy food. They didn't have chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese and hot Cheetos and things like that.
These are kids who have homework until 6 o'clock and are overscheduled with, all kinds of activities until 8 o'clock at night. I mean, I don't think most of us lived childhood this way. So for these kids to be healthy and happy, I'm talking to families about how are they eating, which is a way that we connect with the natural world by literally ingesting it and incorporating it into our bodies. How are we interacting with nature? How often do they get outside? Can they take their homework or a book outside? Can we cut an activity that they have and instead just let them play in an unstructured way and have creative time just running around outside? And it's so natural, and in the process, they're taking away a microbiome from the earth, they're building their immune systems, they're improving their mood. I mean, all of the things, they're earthing, right? They're connected literally to the unlimited negative flow of electrons that are coming from the earth all the time.
A parent has a kid with a disorder like this, they take them into the doctor. Do you think the doctor is going to systematically test for all of those things that I just mentioned and identify them and then treat them? No, that's not what's going to happen. The doctor is going to listen and is going to recommend a medication, or is going to refer to a specialist who's then going to recommend a medication. And then if you parent asks, how long will my kid be on that medication? What do you think the answer is going to be? Shrug of the shoulders, or indefinitely the rest of his or her life, possibly. So this is tragic. I'm a parent, my 6-year-old daughter, and I think that it's one of the greatest disservices we've done to our kids is to pigeonhole them into these categories and not to actually investigate the root causes of these problems. I'm not denying that these problems exist. They do, for sure. But I'm just saying that there's a much better approach that we could take.
There's a beautiful quote from Rumi that says, the pain is the solution to the pain, or the pain is the answer to the pain. And the same thing with illness. It's like, what is the solution to the fever? Well, the fever is the solution. The fever is what's driving, up the body temperature to kill the pathogen or put things back into balance. How do you stop a runny nose or diarrhea? Well, the runny nose and the diarrhea is the cure. So we look at acute illnesses incorrectly, and we drive the disease deeper inside who we are. And I feel like that's also what's happening to our children.
We cannot deny that our children's health is reliant on the health of their parents and their ancestry before that, particularly the health of the mother going into that place of conception and pregnancy. There's more and more showing us that connection, whether it's about the microbial environment or the toxins that mom is exposed to that are passed through the placenta, through the breast milk. There's no denying that ancestry and the role it plays. So I don't think we can remove the child and their health from the mother and the father, but particularly the mother and her health in her life and her ancestry. How we get to that and how we as women don't blame ourselves for our children's health is another thing to contend with. And it doesn't mean that we can't shift it, but the first place we start is with ourselves.
We've got issues with actually absorbing our nutrients. And this is a really big issue, especially when we stand back and look at what's typically going on in a woman's body before she gets pregnant. And that is, she's probably had a round of antibiotics like most of us. Thank you for modern medicine when we need them. But there's been a history of using them a lot when we don't need them. And we're learning from that now that wasn't such a good idea. But there's also a high use of birth control pills in women. And if there was, when we look at drugs, you're hard pressed to find any others that really rival the nutrient depletions that the birth control pill delivers. And this is really scary to me because what are women told all the time? Take the pill, you can get pregnant like that. Like you'll be pregnant the next month when you have a cycle. Now, clinically, we see that that's not the norm. In fact, most women struggle with, ability to conceive after coming off the pill.
Vea, en esa época la gente no pensaba en quedar embarazada. Lo que deseaba era satisfacerse. Y en aquella época se ve claro que la familia tenían 10, 12, 15 hijos. Mucha familia, porque no había restricción, no había, aunque algunas señoras que sí me acuerdo buscaban un casco de mula. Esos animales, una señora buscaban esa mula, cuando se moría un animal de esos, quitaban el casco, lo rascaban así, le sacaban un polvo y lo ponían a cocinar. Y se lo tomaban supuestamente para que no tuvieran hijos. Y aquí hay dos casos que yo conozco. Unos vecinos por ahí, salió panzona, salió interesante una hija de una señora, y cuando tuvo el niño, le dio eso y no parió más, no tuvo más hijos. 2 mujeres de esas.
There's an increasing body of literature that supports the notion that a mother's microbiome can be transferred to her child.
That microbiome is what sets the stage for baby's immune system for life. That's a huge thing. And so a lot of weight falls on mom's shoulders, right? But we can do so much work. We know we can shift the microbiome in 24 hours by eating fiber-rich foods and giving your gut what it loves. Getting more things in like onions and garlic, the allium family, things like tiger nuts, which are rich in fiber, and we know our ancestors ate a lot of. Getting those insoluble and soluble fibers in through the diet. And most women are going to need a round of probiotics, and they all get prescribed eating dirt in my practice. So even if a woman, if you can't garden outside, I actually recommend if you're going to be pregnant, grow lettuce in your windowsill and dust it off and eat it. So you're getting exposed to dirt. What's going on in dirt to grow a really healthy plant is way more complex than a little pill of probiotics can give you. We've got to look at preconception. We've got to have the community support. We've got to have the nature aspect, but we've also got to pay attention to just daily health practices. So when are you getting up in the morning? When are you going to sleep? When it's dark, you better be exposed to dark. And when it's light, it's time to expose yourself to light. This is how we set the circadian rhythm. And as women, our bodies are completely set to rhythms. We cycle with the moon, we cycle with the oceans, all of our organs are set on rhythms. And we now know that if you're not in tune with that circadian rhythm, that dark light cycle, that your liver won't run appropriately. And if your liver won't run appropriately, forget hormone balance, forget gut health, forget all of that. And it's really important that we've got our hormones optimized, because that's going to influence baby's hormones and long-term outcomes in both your mental health and baby's mental health.
Turns out that the circadian system doesn't fully develop until for 6 months after the child is born. So they're getting circadian cues from their environment and also from the mother. So if the mother is up late at night reading a book, or gets up to feed the child late at night and turns on a light, and that alters their circadian rhythm, those signals are being passed to the child, and that's affecting the development of the health of the circadian system.
So the birthing process and even gestation is a really important time for starting to develop the microbiome of the child. We used to think of the whole womb and the birthing canal and all that is fairly sterile, but now we know that the womb, especially in utero, is not a sterile environment. We actually find mom's gut bacteria in amniotic fluid and even in the cord blood. So there's indication that there are immune cells that go and pick up mom's good bacteria from her gut and actually transport it into the fetus in utero through the cord blood, through the amniotic fluid, to get the baby exposed to certain types of microbes before the baby even comes out.
So there's only one place that baby gets mitochondrial DNA, and that's directly from mom. And that's why it is so imperative that as a society, we are looking after women's health. If we want to ensure that all of humanity is optimized and at its best, we have got to look after that mitochondrial DNA, because that's the lineage that's going to be passed on. The eggs that a woman has today that will become a future baby were actually maturing in her mother's body, and her mother's eggs were actually maturing in her grandmother's body. So when we say lineage, we literally mean the female lineage. We know environmental toxins and the environment has a huge impact. So grandmas that smoke have grandchildren who have higher risks of autism. Does that mean that we say, oh, that's all grandma's fault? No, that means we say, that's really impactful. We need to take care that mothers aren't exposed to smoke, and we need to ask what else could be involved and what else can we come in with to negate that effect?
So you could see how if you inherit large numbers of good mitochondria and good mitochondrial health from your mother, then it will give you a better chance of survival, better chance of not getting cancers or Alzheimer's or other diseases that require lots of energy, diseases of the brain, the heart, the endocrine organs, the kidneys, and the muscles.
The most important thing we can do when we're thinking about conception and fertility is to clean the body up in advance, to really make sure that the body's detoxification organs are functional, that we are actually doing what we need to do with everything that we're exposed to. And that preparation work, if we have the opportunity to do it before getting pregnant, it's supremely important to do that work.
If you can give your body the information that the environment is super safe, right? Because your body will not get pregnant if the environment's not safe. That's just bad for everybody. But if you can give the perspective, the environment's safe, but also it's super nutrient dense, your body is game to make a baby. So that's one way we actually work with women who are struggling with fertility.
What we have found is that, of course, it's possible to inherit trapped emotional energy at the moment of conception, but we also find emotional baggage that's picked up. Usually, that emotional energy, usually those trapped emotions are from what their mother is going through, because the mother is feeling an intense emotion and her whole being is resonating and vibrating at that frequency, and the baby's inside of her and it's resonating at that frequency too, and that emotional energy gets trapped in the baby. This is not an uncommon thing at all. Most of them occur during the third trimester. We have on occasion seen them in the second, and on rare occasions even in the first trimester. These emotional energies that you pick up in the womb can have dramatic effects on you.
There's also in utero trauma, so how mum feels while she's pregnant, if she's going through trauma, if she's depressed, if she's in a socially conflictual relationship, if she's having losses, the baby is picking up on it and it's affecting the genetic expression of the baby as well.
We can see from the research that when mom is stressed, so anxiety, depression, major stressors during pregnancy, that baby's actually born with shorter telomeres. So we're actually seeing that not only can this stress have a negative impact on baby's mental health and cognitive development, but one step further is that there is research showing that it could actually impact their lifespan. We need to stand back and look, what are the stressors that society is placing on women and then placing on mothers on a whole? Because that's truly the stress that's impacting us, that lack of community. They're not having that support. And because society's narrative is always like, mom, you need to do better. You need to be a super mom. You need to do, go, go, go. We often turn that on ourselves and we think that we're the deficit, and that's really, I see so often of the psychological component that where we see postpartum depression and things like that arising. It's very much my belief that if we want to practice true preventative medicine and we really want to ensure that like our species as a whole survives, we've got to take care of our future mothers and our current mothers now.
That stress is one of the most harmful things for the mother and the baby. It can change birth weight, it can lead to premature births, and so meditation can really help with that because it's giving you a tool to come into your body and into the right now. And I love working with pregnant women because for my same time and energy, I get to make 2 meditators instead of 1, and then all that bliss chemistry that the mother is producing, the baby gets to enjoy as well. And what I've heard anecdotally is that a lot of my students who have had a child and then meditate and have another child is that their labor is so much easier. The baby comes out like this little Buddha baby that's all happy. But so it's fun to conjecture what the big long-term effects would be if every pregnant woman was meditating, if that became as common as taking prenatal vitamins. I think that'd be a really exciting world to live in.
The placenta is the most amazing organ, and it has so many functions. It creates the hormones that support pregnancy. It keeps the baby and the mother's blood supply separate. Even though what mom eats, what mom drinks, the toxins mom is exposed to, the happy hormones that mom feels, the stress hormones that mom feel, all go to the baby, right? Smoking, drugs, most stuff pass through to the baby, but the blood vessel, the circulation is different.
So we all know somebody who's like, I can eat whatever I want and I never gain a pound. And then there's, her best friend Susie who looks at a piece of cake and puts on 20 pounds. And we say, well, that's not fair. Well, the landscape of that person while they were in fetal development might have been totally different from the other person. And so if you're exposed, for example, to certain chemicals that might predispose you towards weight, you're just the person that has to work harder, because the land in which you were developed, meaning the womb, was different, and it presented a different set of challenges. One of the discussion points around environmental chemicals is that the doses are really small and it's the dose makes the poison, and that's really the sort of standard toxicology approach to looking at whether or not a chemical is harmful. And what we're seeing, and this is sort of showing up in this 10 American study that the EWG did, is that we're having exposures at these incredibly critical windows of development, of fetal development, and endocrinologists like to say that the timing of the dose makes the poisons, or the timing is what makes the poison, and it's not the dose, because our bodies are designed to respond and react to these infinitesimally small levels of hormone in the body, which is what we're getting in the exposures that we're getting every day. So, that study really just shined a light on this is something that we can't avoid, period. We have to pay attention.
91% of the pregnant women in Canada had the Bt toxin in their blood, and so did 80% of their unborn fetuses. So if it's in the unborn fetus, and there's no blood-brain barrier yet developed, we have a hole poking toxin in the brains of the offspring of this generation.
So if we want to start with the best birth outcomes, we have to go upstream. Now, ideally that's preconception. I'd love to see it at least a year for every woman, but at minimum, we've got to do 4 months of preconception care. And the reason for that is that we're looking at the maturation process of the egg. So the female egg takes 90 days to mature. With that in mind, you have all the eggs, yes, but you have to get them ready for conception. And in doing that, your body goes through a 90-day maturation process, getting that one egg ready. During that maturation process, you are super sensitive, you are super vulnerable to environmental toxins because the egg is going through peaks and troughs of methylation. So what does that mean? That's all about B vitamin status. And so we now know that's part of why folate is so important, is because it's actually when that egg is getting ready. Now the same is true for sperm maturation, which is about 72 days. So men get a little shorter leadway in terms of the work that we have to do. But again, it's best if we can set it up a year in advance, and especially for mom.
Before my wife and I conceived our daughter, we were doing a prenatal plan, which was, okay, let's make sure that I'm healthy, let's make sure you're healthy, let's make sure you're sleeping, let's make sure I'm sleeping, let's make sure we're addressing all of our stress, let's make sure if there's any unclosed doors, we close those doors. If there's any relationships that need mended, let's mend them. If there's any people we have to cut out, let's cut them out. So we wanted the clean slate before we even started to try to get pregnant.
I see pregnant women holding cell phones on their belly, laptops on their belly as a shelf, might be convenient, but for children, who knows what it's doing to them? One thing is sure, it is impairing growth, and it is having an effect on the unborn fetus. And I've heard about one study from Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. He's seeing the sickest patients on the planet. He's seeing autistic kids, and he's aiding them a lot. So his word means a lot. He said that the EMFs that a pregnant woman will be exposed to are concentrated in the womb, whereas previously they thought that it was shielded. It's actually a better conducting material. And think about the child, the unborn child is swimming in water. So every time you have more water, you have more microwave signals that can come and have effects. The same thing if you have just water in the microwave oven, it will heat faster than a food which contains water. So unfortunately, the effects on children seem to be way more detrimental.
All the pressure's on women. Women, you have to be healthy. It's all about you. You've got to go get these IVF treatments or these fertility treatments. You're spending $10,000, $15,000 and it doesn't work. And I've had women who come to me after doing these $10,000, $20,000 procedures. No one's ever brought up the husband or the boyfriend or whoever the male counterpart is. The first thing I do when I see a woman who's done quote unquote everything right and has not gotten pregnant, I go to the man and I say, okay, let's run your stool test. And guess what shows up most of the time? Infections. These bacterial infections, these parasites, other infections are stealing nutrients from the man, therefore affecting sperm quality. Once the male is healthy as possible, as long as everything's great with the woman, fertility issues go away. So if you're having trouble getting pregnant, and many people are, you have to look at both parties. You can't, this can't just be put on the women. The men, you've got to step up. If you're overweight, if you're drinking Mountain Dew, you've got to cut it out. If you're not moving, you're sedentary, you've got to start moving.
Not all women were put here to be mothers, but some women were absolutely put here to be mothers. And we need to respect and honor women wherever they're at. And this is where I see society has gotten way off base in that, women are forced into careers more than ever. So moms who are forced to work but would rather be stay-at-home moms, their children have more anxiety. They have a lot more mental health issues. They're not as adaptable. But a mom who does want to work and she's outside the home, her child's much more adaptable in life. And so it's not the work piece. It's what is congruent with mom's desire and what she really was meant to do on this earth, because we all come here with our own purpose and our own sense of what it is that we're here to do.
The mother is heavily invested in ensuring the survival of the child. And it does it by a lot of mechanisms. First, of course, by passing on the mitochondria to the child, healthy mitochondria to the child, and then nurturing the child with nutrients that actually makes a child more adapted to the environment that it's in. So that is, I know it puts a lot of pressure on mothers to be perfect in a way, but if the mothers were educated enough, then they would know that They have to take care of their mitochondria before entering pregnancy. They have to take care of their gut bacteria before and during pregnancy, and even after, to maintain good health.
I think it was about 2003 or 2004, the Environmental Working Group did a first of its kind study where they took umbilical cord blood from 10 babies in the United States and measured for industrial contaminants and synthetic chemicals, and found almost 300 chemicals inside this umbilical cord blood, which is telling us that our babies are being pre-polluted, right? So we used to operate under the assumption that the placenta was this barrier that kept chemicals out and that it was this pristine environment, and that's actually not the case at all. And so it's really just an alarm bell, right? It's a siren ring to say, you know, we are not immune from these exposures, and these exposures are happening during the most critical time in our lives, which is fetal development. It's literally when we are being built.
I think that, you know, having a standard vaginal delivery, we're now seeing that there are so many benefits when a baby comes out of the birth canal. You know, we know now that the way we understand the immune system, the way we understand how important the microbiome is, you know, the baby gets a big dose of bacteria from the birth canal when the baby comes out that way. That then helps to influence that child's microbiome and that child's immune system. It's really quite profound, and it's something we've sort of missed a little bit when we've try to bypass that process.
The breaking of the water actually plays a significant role because it unleashes and kind of disrupts all the microbes that are sticking and adhered to mom's birth canal, and kind of releases them and makes them open for transfer, right? So there's a significant process in that. And as the baby's moving through the birth canal, he or she's picking up huge amounts of microbes, not only on its skin, but also in its mouth, in its nose, eyes, oral cavity, and so on. And it's interesting when you look at mom's vaginal bacteria, because the vaginal bacteria microbiome is actually one of the areas where you don't want a lot of diversity. There are 5 specific strains, lactobacillus strains, that actually are predominant in the vaginal microbiome. And if you start to see lowering amounts of those 5 strains, you start to get disruptions in the vaginal microbiome like BV, bacterial vaginosis, or chronic UTIs or yeast infections. But what happens by the second trimester of being pregnant is a particular bacteria called Lactobacillus johnsi starts to gain high prevalence in the vaginal canal. And that's really interesting because Lactobacillus johnsi, one of its main functions is digesting milk. And, you know, women are not digesting milk in their vaginas all the time. And so the only reason for that bacteria to increase in prevalence is to inoculate the baby. So the baby has a significant amount of Lactobacillus johnsi, so it can start digesting mother's milk right off the bat. And so once the baby passes through the vaginal canal, gets inoculated with all the bacteria, then after a period of inoculation, then there's something we call succession, and that's the bacteria start to specialize in their specific regions. If you take a newborn baby and you swab the baby's eyes, ears, mouth, vaginal canal if it's a girl, skin, all of those microbes resemble mom's vaginal bacteria. About 6 months after the baby's born, you swab the skin, gut, mouth, and so on. It starts to resemble mom's skin bacteria, vaginal bacteria, gut bacteria. They start specializing in their role. So that becomes a really important way of inoculating and getting the baby started with their microbiome journey.
So typically, what happens is if a mother's microbiome is out of balance, she's going to transfer her microbiome to her baby when the baby is born vaginally. That's sort of just naturally what happens. And so if there's some kind of vulnerability in the mother's microbiome, that gets transferred to the baby. So this is a multi-generational thing that can happen. If grandma took lots of rounds of antibiotics, that vulnerability in the immune system will be transferred down to the mother, which will then be transferred down to their grandchild.
What happens when a baby is born by C-section, if that's necessary? And sometimes it is, and you save lives. It's great. I mean, nothing wrong with that. But there's a deficit because baby doesn't come down the canal, baby doesn't get that inoculation, so the bacteria in baby's gut after birth thinks that the bacteria that was in the operating room is the normal bacteria that should be in the gut. So baby has staph and strep and Clostridium and these bacteria that really aren't supposed to be there, that baby's GI tract thinks is normal. That's why the studies show those kids 3, 4, 5 years later, much higher incidence of allergies and eczema and asthma, much higher than babies that were born by natural childbirth, because they didn't get that inoculation at birth. So some surgeons now, some obstetricians, if they have to do a C-section, what they're doing is they're taking sponges and going into mom's vaginal canal and getting as much of that bacteria as they can. And when baby comes out by C-section, the nurse takes a sponge and just smothers baby's face with this bacteria, you know, and like a little Q-tip inside the gums and stuff, just to try to inoculate baby with some of this really important, critical messengers from mom's reproductive tract.
If a woman knows she's going to have a C-section, if this is the route that we're going to have to go, we want inoculation at birth. So what does that mean? Vaginal swab, place it on baby's mouth, and then I want baby breastfeeding on mom as soon as possible, on papa's skin. We're talking about passing baby around to actually get the skin flora of the communal members. So the people you're gonna have tight in that tribe.
I worked as an obstetric nurse, and that's when I developed fear of birth. I saw horrors. Healthy women coming in to have a baby were just getting this cascade of interventions and causing problems. And I was having, like, as a nurse, to rescue, right? I was seeing bad outcomes. So it was kind of like the ER scene, like a crisis, a fear of malpractice, a disaster waiting to happen. That was the mentality and the feel of, on the unit. It's going to the hospital, putting on a hospital gown, being told can't eat and drink, so given an IV fluids, continuous electronic fetal monitoring in the bed. So already her movement is restricted, right? And she's not eating, so she's not going to labor well. So then she needs medication to induce and make the labor happen. Also in the hospitals, it's sort of like a factory, kind of get them in, get them out, and there's a time clock. That's not really in the best interest of moms and babies, so a centimeter an hour, we have to get this woman going. She has to be moving, dilating a centimeter an hour. So Pitocin is that, they're going to give medication, and they tend to up the dose because it's very hard to do that without pain medication. So then there's epidural, right? And so already she's set up to have an operative delivery, whether that's cesarean or vacuum or forceps delivery. And also with invasive procedures, with frequent vaginal exams, there's risk of infection.
Yeah. 3번 살 때만 최근에 3번 살이 나갔다 올게요. 예. 그니까 기본 자체는 신세계는 오바짱가 있다 올게. Sono stato nareteo. Sono stato minna.
One of the things that I really have come to know about home birth is that it's treated like a natural situation until proven otherwise, and in a hospital it's treated as an emergency situation until proven otherwise. And the way that it's approached because of that is usually heavy interventions. So how can we move this along? How can we make sure it's going to be exactly what we know it is so that we can get this out the way that we're used to? And doctors are trained to solve problems, but birth isn't a problem.
I was gonna have a traditional birth and everything was gonna be just the way that it should be. And one of the things with that was I was blessed to have a friend that was pregnant a couple months longer than me. And she kind of had the same idea. And month after month, after she went to the OB's office, she noticed that they were stripping every bit of what she wanted from that birth. And she ended up having an emergency C-section and all of that. So I knew that that's not the way that I wanted to go. And I knew that there was something else out there. And so when we did our research, we figured my cousin had had a few home births and things had gone completely great. And so I started researching about it. But then I talked to her and she said, you know what, your body could have done this 2,000 years ago without you. And your body was made for this. So doing it at home in your most natural setting is going to be the best way.
So I have 2 babies, one that's 3.5, not a baby anymore, and one that's 8 months, and we had them both in a home birth situation, one in this home actually, and it was very empowering for us. And it was just because we felt like it was on our terms and we were able to choose
on the most like natural primal level, like what felt right in those moments, and just have that capacity to do so.
Sospiti taka mi vana da bedia sospiti. E mia mami. Prota ihame. Δάσκαλο δικό μας, μετά την κατοχή, παπά δικό μας, πρόεδρο δικό μας και μαμή δικιά μας στο χωριό. Τώρα το λέω που είσαστε εξευγενισμένοι, τι έχετε στο χωριό που δεν έχετε τίποτα.
Mire, eso es realmente, ¿cómo diría yo? Impresionante, porque las mujeres siempre parían en casa. Bien, había unas señoras que llamaban comadronas, que eran las personas que ayudaban a nacer al bebé. Asistían, nada más que la mandaban a llamar. En Nicoya hubo una señora que llamó Doña Isidra. Esa señora trajo al mundo, ayudó a nacer a cualquier cantidad de gente increíble.
Natural, con una partera, con una señora que las ayudara. Aquí no había nada, aquí no había un médico, aquí no había nada. Era una señora que ayudaba a otra señora.
Women have been birthing on their own and with midwives, I mean, since the beginning of time. This is how things have been done. A lot of times what we see in America is that, you know, physicians are actually telling patients it's dangerous to birth at home. You could have a complication. You know, there are complications that come with birth, but what we actually see is that your risk in birthing in a hospital for complications can actually be a lot higher. And the reason for that is because the respect for the body is lacking a lot in these institutions. And that's really something that I think we all need to stand back and examine. In that, you know, this was born out of me being in such this hardcore science background and doing recombinant DNA technology, manipulating genes on the cellular level to make them express whatever that I wanted in the organism. I had to stand back and recognize that we weren't respecting nature as a whole. And we've forgotten that at some point, that there's a lot of innate wisdom within the body.
There is lots of fear around home birth. I think especially, I'm sure in this country where we're not as familiar with it, and you'd be surprised how much in Los Angeles, because really there's not a lot of people you know, taking that route. And I know that even for myself, when I was having my first home birth, I was afraid to tell anyone. I knew I wanted it for so long, but I was afraid to tell any of my family and friends because they had never done it. They didn't know anyone that did. They only heard horror stories. And I had friends that would tell me, oh, this is a bad choice. You're gonna hurt your baby. Like this, you're making a bad choice for your child. And when I was in the situation where I was vulnerable and I was unsure, and it was the first time in my life when it was truly about someone other than myself, like it got to me. There's a lot of unnecessary fear, but I think it does come from a place of love. I think people really are trying to like save you because it's what they know and what they grew up with and how they were born.
A casa. Molto bene, meglio che ospedale, perfetto. Funzionava che c'era una persona che faceva quel lavoro, chiaramente. Io per fortuna ho trovato una persona bravissima. Niente, c'era mia mamma e mio marito. Tutto a posto. Era una cosa naturale. Costava fatica perché è molto doloroso, però era naturale.
The pelvis is actually 3 bones connected by ligaments. So when a woman is on her back, the pelvic diameter is smaller, and we don't have gravity. But when a woman is standing up, or let's say one leg is lifted, right, or she's squatting, you know, so the pelvic diameter increases, and so it's a matter of kind of physics sometimes. As you know, I use a lot of dancing, alternative positions. Women also, when left to their own devices, will not lie on their back to give birth. It's not comfortable. They will assume a more comfortable position, which eases their labor. And now studies are showing that that's more beneficial and reduces cesarean. You know, it shortens labor, it shortens fetal distress, you know, it reduces fetal distress. So the studies are now, we need studies to show what we've been doing for thousands of years.
We don't birth well on our backs for the most part. Some women do. It's perfectly fine. I wasn't one of those, and most of my patients are not. A woman needs to get into that space, and not only that physical space that serves her, but that mental space as well.
One of my great uncles told me, he said, like, great grandfather, when she was kind of getting ready or due, We'll ask for the rest of the family to take care of her or watch after her because she will sneak out to have her kids on her own on the river. That was literally what one of her kids, my great uncle, told me. Yeah.
So your grandmother would go off and while she was pregnant, sneak out to the river and have a kid. Did she ever have any kids like that? Did she ever do that?
I don't know if
somebody always caught her.
I don't know if that was the case for her, probably, because she had 12 or 13.
And so what I felt in midwifery school was that the philosophy is very different. And it kind of just as a woman knows how to breathe and a heart knows how to get, beat, we don't have to think about it. A woman's body knows how to birth. The medical interventions became more the exception rather than the norm. And I was just witnessing calm, beautiful births, and it was just very healing, and it was very beautiful. It was like restoring the humanity to the process. I've had women dance their baby out, laugh their baby out, sing their baby out. I had a woman, she was so into this hypnobirthing that I could barely tell what was like the entire birth, she was in like Shavasana sitting up. Just like that. And at one point I heard, and I said to my assistant, I said, is she pushing? I wasn't sure. And she gave birth to my biggest baby in my practice. My scale goes up to 12 pounds, and it was 11 pounds, 15 ounces, no tear. Just like that, And so, I mean, I've just been amazed at the capacity of women to enjoy their birth experience and to be able to do it and tap into their strength and just feel so proud of themselves.
To be able to have a birth in however way you want it, that's amazing. And that's really what needs to be screamed from the rooftops. But I think that if we saw this more, if we saw the natural approach to birth more, and I think that movement is happening, maybe just in my small part of the world, but I think it's happening. And I think that it would become more normal and there would be no fear around it, and then we can make the decision that we felt like we wanted to make based off of a truth in the decision rather than a fear-based decision.
Our generation of mothers who went before us, they were the ones having high-level, high-touch medical interventions. And so, right now, we don't know. My current generation just isn't sure, can I birth on my own? Am I confident in this? So it's really important for women to feel confident, empowered in whatever decision they're making. And this is what I believe is the true informed consent.
For thousands of years, women have been giving birth in the house, in the home, surrounded by other women. So women were seeing birth, the younger sister, the older sister, the aunt, everyone was around birth, so they weren't afraid of it. It was just part of life. And still, actually, the majority of babies are born in this way around the world.
No, nada. Nació el chiquillo, había una mujer que no habían partera, nada. De los mismos vecinos se vio una a la otra y el niño lo limpiaban y ellos ahí lo bañaban con hojas que cocinaban. Eso era nada más.
あの時はね、今助産婦ね。助産婦っていうのがいたんですよ。専門ね、子供を産ますお医者さん、女のね、それいたんだけど、たくさんいないから呼べないわけよ。そしたら長老、一番年の下おばさんたちが面倒見て出産させる。
The big pet peeve of mine, it's not just me, I mean many conscious healthcare providers looking at the research now, is why are we cutting umbilical cords? That's a third of baby's blood supply that was backed up into the placenta during pushing is just completely severed, which is equivalent to a hemorrhage. So then we have to resuscitate more babies. And more babies are anemic. Now they're into stem cell donation, right? That's saving the cord blood. Who needs the cord blood? The baby needs the cord blood. It's full of stem cells and iron and oxygen and red blood cells and immune, all sorts of immune components to help that baby function and transition from 24-hour womb service, I call it, when the lungs aren't being used, to, and the heart shunts the blood away from the lungs. The baby is being breathed and exhaled through the cord. So then when the baby is born, that whole inner system needs to transition. The heart needs to now pump blood to the lungs. It needs blood volume to pump blood to the lungs, and oxygen, and the baby takes the first breath, and there's this whole transition, and then the baby starts breathing on its own and has now stem cells and all the components to have long-term health.
Even after I had the baby and I got to know that the cord was going to be intact, and I didn't have to worry about my baby being whisked away from me in those moments when, of course, there's a time and a place for that, but if everything's all good, the baby really should be there, and you want the baby to be there on your chest and have that bonding moment and share the sense with each other, and just the only word I could describe other than like amazingly beautiful is it's a very primal thing. It's very natural. And when your body's allowed the space to do what it needs to do, it's amazing. It's magic.
That connection, by the way, between baby and mom is the most powerful connection on the planet. When there's that skin-to-skin contact, it is the most powerful thing for that baby. They found that in research studies that when babies were not held, they had emotional instability later on in life. That's how important that is.
If we can put baby on mom's chest right away, baby knows that heartbeat. There's a communication. Oh my gosh, the moment you smell your baby. My son, he to this day smells like sugar cookies to me. It's the most intoxicating smell. It gets all the hormones going that start communicating to the body. Let's make more breast milk, but also let's start protecting mama's brain. And let's feel this sense of connection, this human bonding, which we all crave. We all crave this and need that bonding.
And then the breast milk, bar none, the greatest nutrient on the planet. That colostrum that first enters into the baby's mouth is going to establish their immune system for the rest of their life.
The vast majority of babies know how to breastfeed. So it's amazing to watch. So when a baby is put skin to skin, little by little, they find their way to the breast and to the nipple, and they start sucking. And that's called the breast crawl. That first hour when the baby's most alert is so crucial, so that the baby's not drugged and sleepy, so if the baby's drugged and sleepy, won't breastfeed well, and then that just causes a whole cycle of problems and can ultimately lead to failed breastfeeding, which is huge in terms of the health of the baby.
I recognized while I was pregnant, there's a lot of things about birth I didn't know, but I saw so many women breastfeed confidently in my family that when it came time for me to breastfeed, it was the one thing I knew I had this. I've got this, I can do this, because I had seen it done so well, so to speak, but I had seen the women struggle and how they had overcame it.
I think that nursing, as beautiful and amazing and natural as it is, also presents some challenges for people. I had a very difficult time nursing my son, and I was so determined to do it that I fought through quite a lot of pain, honestly. And I was very stubborn about getting help because I knew I could do it and I wanted to do it. And I think that that's also another stigma that needs to be broken down. It can be beautiful, natural, and painful. It can be solved. You can ask for help and you can talk to other mothers about it. And I think that there's kind of this, you have to do it all the way or not at all kind of mentality, and it really needs to be discussed more so that we can open up the conversation and figure out what's going on. Is it a tongue tie, a lip tie? These were things I didn't even know about until later into my pregnancy with my son. I'd never even thought about those things. Is it because of latch, which is for years and years what we were trained about, it's just latch? Well, no, there's a lot more to it. This discussion is so not talked about, but it's widely, babies are born how often every single day? How many babies are born, and we don't talk about nursing?
Have you seen breastfeeding change when you were younger and now? Do mothers still breastfeed for 6 months, a year, 2 years, anything like that?
Yeah, breastfeed is still a big thing. Yeah, it's as I see it, at least it hasn't changed. To be honest, I'm aware of you guys having that discussion up there, it shouldn't be in public, but
yeah.
You do it. Yeah, you do it. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, the baby gotta eat. What else? No, it hasn't changed. And women here are very serious about it also.
Like they think it's important.
They think it's important, and they will do it. They don't care. They will do it.
I remember when I came home with my first baby and I was determined to break the mold of like where you should or shouldn't breastfeed. And I remember my mom was like uncomfortable with it because it's not what she grew up with. And she was like, what, are you trying to start a movement? I was like, yes, I am. Like, I'm trying to do this the way that it needs to be done. It's the most natural thing. And we need to stop this stigma that is around nursing and that it being inappropriate in any way. And that's one whole issue. But then there's also, you know, the health around breastfeeding. Like, it's such a good source. It's literally the perfect food for baby. It was made by nature, by our bodies for babies. It's completely, and not only is it made for babies, but it's made for your individual child. If they're feeling unwell in any way, your body picks up on that through saliva, through the nipple, and it's able to produce a perfect milk for them. Like, that's crazy. That is so cool.
Fornidos, bonitos, lindísimos. No tenían problemas solo con leche de la madre. No había había veces que les daban, digamos, 6 meses, 1 año. Había veces que les daban hasta 3 años porque decían que así no quedaban embarazadas otra vez.
Also, women that want to avoid the birth control pill and the IUD and sort of the medical options of birth control, or they don't want to use a condom. Dad doesn't want to use a condom, whatever. Breastfeeding was the way that is a natural form of contraception.
あの時はね、見ること言ってなかったんですよ。また全部昔の人はもう全部おっぱいだけで。低理論そこはもう3歳ぐらいから2歳の後半ぐらいから大抵理論そこやっていたはず。
A los 6 años.
6 años.
Sí, uno andaba jugando ahí en el patio y todo, y cuando le da ganas de mamar, uno iba corriendo de la mamá y ya le parada, y uno se pegaba.
I think it's kind of ridiculous that we call anything after 6 months extended breastfeeding, because the World Health Organization has actually recommended that breastfeeding go until 2 years of age. We have seen for a very long time in human history that women have breastfed, 3 years, 6 years, I mean, much longer than we see today. And the reason for that is because it's entirely a great nutrient-dense source of food, but there's also what we now know from the science that baby's gut isn't solidified until about 2 years of age. The microbiome isn't set. So this is great comfort, right? We've got 2 years to play with that. So maybe preconception or pregnancy, you didn't get it right. Maybe baby was born via C-section or had to have antibiotics early on. We can still do a lot of work. And the most powerful thing you can do is breastfeed your child for at least 2 years.
Breastfeeding has a tremendous amount to do with the shape of the jaw. So when a child actually suckles and sucks on a breast, the breast actually presses to the roof of the mouth. And as the baby sucks the milk out of the breast, it puts pressure from the breast to the roof of the mouth of the baby, causing the palate to expand naturally. As the upper jaw, the palate expands naturally, the tongue forms a contact with that palate, and the lower jaw starts to form naturally to the upper jaw. When a woman stops breastfeeding, then the stimulation of the jaw to expand and grow is not there anymore. And that's where a lot of deformity comes in. So breastfeeding is a critical element to the natural formation of the jaw.
They've done studies on Romanian orphans who didn't get this sense of bonding through their caregivers initially early on in life. And so one of the things they found, they developed all these neurodevelopmental behavioral issues. And from a neurochemical perspective, one of the main reasons was because oxytocin wasn't produced.
When she starts breastfeeding, it causes a rise of certain hormones in her body, one of which is called oxytocin, which is the hormone that makes her uterus contract around the blood vessels so she doesn't bleed. And this happens every time, that she doesn't hemorrhage. So this happens every time she breastfeeds. And normal baby, you know, it's normal for babies to breastfeed every hour and a half, 2 hours. So you know, in that first 24 hours, that first week, you know, the babies, and even you know, in the postpartum period, medically is termed 6 weeks, she will have much less bleeding, much less iron loss, much less anemia. Just from, you know, physically, just from breastfeeding. They're also finding breastfed mothers have less breast cancer. And that risk, that benefit increases with each breastfeeding baby. And the longer that she breastfeeds.
Now, one of the aspects of mother's milk that's really important is the fact that it contains 600 to 800 different species of bacteria. Mother's milk is loaded with microbes. It's one of the most microbial dense foods. And then the other thing it contains is up to 200 different oligosaccharides, which are prebiotics. And these prebiotics, babies can't even digest for energy. It's there purely to help seed the microbes that the baby has been exposed to and that's coming in from mother's milk.
Convenience of nursing is definitely one of my favorite things. We do co-sleep, and it's so easy to just roll over, feed the baby, know that she's okay, she's right there, and go back to sleep. I don't have to get up, I don't have to, you know, make a bottle of warm anything. That is definitely a huge factor for me.
It's free. It's so convenient. You don't have to get up at 3 in the morning and start boiling water and pouring powder, you know, making formula. It's just, you know, here, you know, and it's just convenient. And you can, anywhere, anytime, always available. And it's always perfect for exactly where your baby is.
I have a huge place in my heart for moms. I think you become a mom and you see the big community and how divided it really is over so many different topics that doesn't need to be that way. And nursing is one of those. And I think that there's a camp of people that truly, out of love, really, you know, they say breast is best and they fight for breastfeeding. And I think it's out of a place of love. But when someone can't do it and they're trying really hard, it doesn't feel like it's a loving space. It feels like a divide. It feels like us against, you know, them against me. And it's very difficult. And I think it doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of options. I mean, there are some very traditional, but today non-traditional options, like even wet nursing is coming back. You know, I know some communities of moms that are open to nursing each other's babies.
Mi abuela, la mamá de mi papá, le da de mamar a una señora de aquí de San Miguel. Ella se enfermó con esa mastitis, como ubre de leche que dicen. Entonces le trajeron el niño a mi abuela para que ella le diera amamantar.
My favorite actually option if you're going to try a breast milk that isn't, you know, coming from your body is a community breast milk bank, because when you get into large breast milk banks, they're pasteurized and it's good that it's safe, but it turns into something a little bit different than the natural source. And so when you have a community, there's a lot of like mothers groups that will be willing to, they're already pumping and they've got extra milk and they're willing to donate it to you, and you might be getting it from a couple different sources, but that's a really great option. And it doesn't have to be for every feeding either. If you can't get your hands on milk, then you know, it's just, some is better than none. And then of course you can home make formula. So that way you get it more fresh. That because of shelf stability, it's a little bit difficult to make the perfect formula that you can buy off the shelf. And although I think they're getting closer and closer to making something better, it's just not there yet. And so if you can home make formulas, there's some that you can find in different books and online. And of course you want to do your due diligence and make sure it's one that's going to work with your baby and you know, and for you, and you want to make sure that it's going to be kept in the fridge for only as long, and because there's not the preservatives. But if you can figure all that out, it's a really cool option.
Formula can at least, you know, they can put synthetic vitamins and nutrients, but there's not one formula that can do anything about the immune components.
And it's sort of this hubris, if you will, of humanity, that we can be better than nature. It's sort of the breast milk thing. We can make a better breast milk than breast milk. And this was the idea in the 70s. So my mother always tells me I was bottle fed because the whole thinking at the time and the marketing at the time was that, hey, we have made a better breast milk, and if you want your kids to be great, give them bottle-fed formula. And it took this whole campaign, this whole breast is best campaign, to bring us back to the fact that let's stop trying to fool Mother Nature.
I think the most important thing to do when you're choosing a formula is to just flip the bottle over and read the ingredients. Like, what is in that? What is your baby having? Is it corn syrup and soy and, you know, preservatives as the first couple ingredients? Like, what is your baby getting?
We now know that bottle-fed babies versus breastfed babies have a higher prevalence rate of metabolic disease, have a higher prevalence rate of allergies, asthma, even things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and so on. We know that that impact of not having mother's milk is something that can be realized for the lifetime of the child. You know, and it can start early. The child can develop allergies, asthma, and all that early on, or the child can end up being obese in their teens and later 20s and so on. And all of that stems from just not getting the right microbes through mother's milk.
Mom's breast knows to deliver these immunoglobulins. It knows exactly what to give baby to set that gut right, to get that immune system right, and to deliver that bolus of nutrition that baby's immature liver needs and baby's, you know, immature nervous system needs to not throw itself into a hypoglycemic crash. This all happens within, you know, minutes, literally minutes.
The mother makes IgA antibodies and goes into saliva and other secretions, particularly in breast milk. So there is almost 10 times more IgA antibodies in breast milk against whatever the mother is eating every day. So by doing breastfeeding, she is transferring these fantastic IgA antibodies made against different food antigens into the gut, where protect that baby against food allergy in the future.
As long as the mother is breastfeeding, the baby is getting immunity, passive immunity. Whatever she's immune to, the baby's going to be immune to.
Other many factors in the breast milk can regulate the Treg cells, which are so important in induction of oral tolerance, not to react against food and prevent allergy in the future.
It seems pretty clear there are tremendous benefits that come with vaginal birth and sufficient breastfeeding, particularly for the development of the child's microbiota population and immune system. But one of the most emotionally charged topics when it comes to healthy children revolves around the topic of vaccines. And when we opened this can of worms, the answers we got were quite surprising.
One of the key things to understand about vaccines, if you really look at certain vaccines and the scientific literature, there's no question that they are effective, okay? Purely, not philosophical, but purely at data analysis, outcomes, regions, epidemiology studies, there's some pretty good evidence that they have their intended goal, okay? And then on the other side, there's potential subgroups that may be at risk for certain vaccines, like HPV vaccinations, lots of reported adverse effects with them. So not all vaccines have the same effect for the same individual. And the problem I think we have with vaccines isn't this argument whether they're good or bad. The problem with vaccines are what are some things that make us susceptible to certain vaccinations. So we know, for example, if someone has a pre-existing autoimmune disease and they get a vaccine, their immune trigger could be much different than someone who didn't have a predisposing condition like an autoimmune disease before the vaccination.
From my vantage point, where the microbiome and diversity of the microbiome are key, that is one area where I worry about the introduction of vaccines. So I know we can look at vaccines from a number of different standpoints, what chemical constituents there might be, when they're introduced, how they're introduced. There's so many factors with vaccines that can be considered, positive or negative, the exposures. I think what we don't know is what the microbiota looks like in an individual that we're introducing these vaccines into. And that's where, for me, the biggest alarm goes off, because that's where we have no control to know what the intersection between what's being introduced and what exists is. And we know that babies' microbiome are they're so tenuous at that early stage in life. They're still developing their own way of existing outside of mama. So for me, in looking at vaccines, I think they need to be highly considered. I think they need to be sequential if they're being introduced. And we need to watch and listen to reaction, which is not the way that vaccines are introduced today.
The topic of vaccines always seems to carry with it some pretty intense emotion. If there's one thing that's left out of the discussion, though, I think it would be the potential benefits of looking at other cultures to help us sort this out. What have they done, and what effects do we see? It turns out some of the healthy societies we visited did use vaccinations over the last 50 years, but they do seem to take a little different approach.
Faceva un vaccino particolare antivaiolo che di solito si faceva nelle braccia ai bambini piccoli. Poi si faceva un richiamo quando avevano 8 anni circa. E il vaiolo è sparito completamente.
So we are not against vaccines. Vaccines saved many, many lives. But for some individuals who may have genetic makeup for autoimmunity, and by the way, gene is 1/3, environment is 2/3. This is according to National Institute of Health. For those 1/3 who have genetic makeup for autoimmunity, they have to be very careful with vaccination.
2 articles published in 2017 was a cohort study. One group of children vaccinated and another group of children in the same setting unvaccinated. And the vaccinated group had dramatically increased numbers of lifelong allergies, not just food allergies, but also environmental allergies or intolerances compared to the non-vaccinated group.
My argument, in my opinion, is it's absolutely unnecessary. Absolutely. And this is the if your immune system is functioning properly. And that's the problem. And so if we're not starting from birth, doing what we need to do, breastfeeding, giving our children proper nutrition at the proper age, minimizing the toxins that we put on our skin, that we breathe in the air, if we have strong immune systems, disease can't live in our body. Cancer, polio, smallpox, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of vaccination is extremely unnatural. And I actually think that what it's doing is it's disrupting the immune system's proper function. So every time you get a vaccine, I believe your general immunity gets set back a notch. The vaccines are forcing your cells into a Th2, what's called a Th2 type response. And where antibodies is the whole thing. The vaccine wants you to make antibodies. That skips several different steps that should have been there first, that would involve a natural response to this microbe, that your body should have perhaps been able to clear it entirely without ever producing antibodies. Had you been exposed to a normal process, your immune cells would have come into the gut and they would have attacked this virus and they would have cleared it because your immune system was strong before you ever, and it never would have decided that it needed to make antibodies because it was able to clear it without it. But what the vaccine is demanding that you do is to make those antibodies because the intention is for you to have a specific immunity to that one bug.
There's extraordinarily cogent arguments and data about the impact of vaccines on the immune system, the rise of autoimmune diseases, the rise of asthma, the rise of allergies, that all these things are expanding, and there are people who are very scholarly researchers who have started to look at the correlations between the rise of these things and, of course, the rise of the vaccine program as it has existed. And if you just even take a step back and look at it logically, an assault on the immune system that's overwhelming, for which there's no genetic reference.
The triggers of autoimmunity, viral or bacterial antigens, food antigens, toxic chemicals. Now, believe it or don't, all those 3 are major components of the vaccines. So, if you want to vaccinate against measles or Epstein-Barr virus or bacteria for causing pneumonia. You have the bacterial components and viral components, obviously, right? But you add an adjuvant to that. An adjuvant is a mixture of chemicals with oils in order to enhance the immune function against that specific bacterial or viral antigens. The meaning of that is this, that if we inject only a viral or bacterial antigen by itself, then we have to vaccinate 100 times without having these additives in order to get this similar levels of antibodies to be produced by our immune cells. So they add adjuvant in order to enhance the immune function or immune reaction against that antigen, and we produce significant amount of antibodies. But we pay a price for that. Why? Because the adjuvant, it used to be mercury, now is aluminum. And aluminum is toxic to the gut, is toxic to the brain. So these are the two major components of our body involved in overall health. So in some individuals, that these adjuvants, such as aluminum, will have a side effect, and one of those could be Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, Alzheimer's, and other neurologic disorders. So we have the viral components, we have the bacterial components, we have the adjuvants, in this case aluminum, and finally we have food. In some vaccines, I believe we have eggs, gelatin, and other foods as well. No one has done study about synergistic effects of these three components together. Did you know that? I haven't seen a single study where they combined bacterial antigen, for example, with aluminum, and egg as example of food antigen, and see what is the synergistic effects of all those three components on the immune system of individual, which is either susceptible to the infection or susceptible to the toxic chemicals or susceptible to food antigens. So the synergistic effects of these three together can have significant impact on the immune system of certain individuals. That's why some end with autoimmunity and the others do not end up with autoimmunities. The reason I'm mentioning autoimmunities is because right in my library, right there behind me, there is a book called Vaccines and Autoimmunities, written by the same professor who organized the 10th International Congress on Autoimmunity in 2016, Yehuda Schoenfeld from Israel. If there is a textbook telling us that vaccines in some individuals may cause autoimmunities, why we don't listen?
Bueno, tenemos que darnos cuenta que es incubar una enfermedad, ¿no? Gracias, amor. Si te pones una vacuna, te están poniendo la bacteria de una enfermedad. Entonces, esa bacteria tiene dos posibilidades. Una, que te cría defensas, y otra, que se te desarrolle. Porque no se sabe cómo está tu estado, ¿verdad? Cómo está tu organismo. Entonces yo, pues, no es que no haya vacunado a mis hijos, pero de ahí siempre, cuando los vacuné, siempre los vacuné con miedo. Porque tenía miedo de que se me le podía desarrollar la enfermedad estando sano. Pero no. A mí no me gustan las vacunas. Para nada. Y a mi familia yo se las evito. Cuando yo puedo, yo las evito.
what's unfortunate is we're not doing enough research to find out who vulnerable subtypes may be for various vaccinations. I mean, there's really no funding in that. And there's no funding through the NIH for subgroup analysis for any type of for any risk for vaccines, because they're worried that it's going to create the anti-vax, where everyone's going to be anti-vaccine if anything negative comes out with vaccines. So it's a very tough topic if you really look at it from an evidence-based model and a philosophical model. Usually people that are on the extremes are either completely only looking at one study and make an assumption for the rest of vaccines, which is an erroneous part of actually looking at data, evidence. And then you have those that are just philosophical, that just think they're all, evil, and that's where we have the problem. So the goal is to try to have good science where we can actually look at subgroup analysis risk for certain things, and ideally in the future we can looking at a workup where you find out which factors may be a risk factor for certain having an immune response, or if people have conditions like an autoimmune disease, if they get vaccinated, that there could be a problem.
If you go back to when I was a kid and how many vaccines were given, and you look at today, it is so radically expanded that it's shocking.
My parents only had 2 vaccines. I mean, their whole childhood, through, now they try to do flu shot and other things like that. But I mean, when they were kids, all the way till they were adults, they had 2 vaccines, and now we got something in the mail, and it was 6 pages.
Take a drug, and this applies to vaccines too. This drug has a side effect, or a list of side effects. The second drug now has this list of side effects, or I prefer the term adverse effects. You put these two together, not only do you have the adverse effects of this drug, the adverse effects of this drug, but you put them together and now there's new combined adverse effects, which is a third dimension. You put another one, fifth, sixth, it becomes exponential. It wields this destructive force that cannot be anticipated or measured. And you start to look at the vaccine schedule now and how many they're combining, putting together in a small period of time into an immune system that's there's no reference point genetically for your body to understand all this stuff bypassing the first immune layers, being injected directly into the bloodstream, being combined in unprecedented ways for which there's no environmental or genetic reference point, and expect that, we think this will be safe.
Actually, in this study that was done, Journal of Vaccine Research, all the vaccines that tested contained lead. We know that as an adjuvant, they either contain aluminum or mercury, but there's been many other potent toxins found in the vaccines. We know there's retroviruses in there, and so many of the chronic illnesses that we see in the US population is a direct result of a very early childhood injury from the vaccines. It's now published, that vaccinated children have a significant increase in lifelong allergies and neurological illnesses. And of course, one wonders if this huge increase in Alzheimer's disease and stuff is not a late outcome of that. And so that whole thing needs to be looked at. I know there is clean ways to manufacture vaccines which are not done because there has been no public demand for it, but we do believe that that's coming. So I'm not against vaccines, they're a fantastic idea, but the way the program is executed right now is simply wrong and unscientific. I'm a scientist, and it's just on a scientific, it would not withhold any scientific look.
We have an epidemic of behavioral disorders in children now. I mean, the rates of autism have skyrocketed over the past several years, and they've found that that's not just due to increased rates of detection or diagnosis. There's actually an increase in the number of kids who are born with autism.
So there's a lot of controversy around vaccines and autism. Do vaccines cause autism? And the answer to the question is, it's much more complicated than that. Autism is not caused by a singular thing. In fact, no chronic condition, and autism is a chronic health condition, no chronic health condition is ever caused by a single thing.
Okay, this book. I wrote a chapter in this book. What this book is, the whole book, is about neuropsychiatric disorders and infection. They took animal models and gave them measles virus antigen when they were pregnant. When the mice were pregnant, injected them with viral antigens. The probability of those mice newborns having autism was 10 times more if the mother had viral antigen during pregnancies. So this is a textbook, right? Now, so then I hear in the news this week that if the mothers during pregnancy will get vaccinated against DTaP, is extremely beneficial because the child is not going to get whooping cough. That may be true, but also that child could develop also autism, according to what I read, according to this textbook.
I mean, there is no clear connection in the literature that shows vaccinations cause autism, but then if you speak to parents and look at anecdotal stuff, there's a huge amount of anecdotal reports, which you can't overlook either. And then if you look at the data analysis and you're not looking at these subgroup analysis of maybe certain types of people are more prone to vaccines, that's when you do a statistical analysis, you can't find anything. So I think we just need to do better research to really figure out where vaccines stand, and unfortunately we're not doing it.
Y otra pregunta de las que siempre me he hecho, y como hizo mi papá y mi mamá, si a nosotros nunca nos vacunaron, y tampoco nunca nos pasó, ¿verdad? ¿Suerte o genética?
One of the theories about what is autism is that it is a human system that's overloaded. And does that overload happen in utero? Does it happen in the first 6 months of life? Does it happen progressively over time as the child grows? And the answer is yes, 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 and yes. It happens in all of those places. So vaccines are something that stimulates the immune system and may stress it. But there are many other things that do that. Toxic exposures, antibiotics, which wipe out your ability to have a normally functioning immune system, environmental chemicals.
Glyphosate exposure to mouse pups was shown to cause glutamate excitation in the brain in a direct study exposing them to glyphosate. Glutamate excitotoxicity in the brain. And the suspicion of these authors was that glyphosate was acting as a glycine analog, and glutamate and glycine together excite the NMDA receptors. And if you overexcite the NMDA receptors in the brain, you can burn out the neurons. So that's a very simple story. And autism has also been connected to sort of overstimulated neurons in the brain, sort of a chronic inflammatory state in the brain. When glutamate has played an important role in autism, glutamate is also in the MMR vaccine, and the MMR vaccine is contaminated with glyphosate. And I suspect that the glutamate and glyphosate in the MMR vaccine are getting into the brain in some cases where the child has a leaky brain barrier and causing a neuroexcitatory state in the brain that's leading to autism down the road. So that's a way that I could explain autism directly from the MMR vaccine, especially if it were contaminated with glyphosate. And I wrote a few papers relating to the aluminum in the vaccines as well, and I think that is a serious problem. I think that may be the worst problem with the vaccines, aside from perhaps the glyphosate contamination. They've also been found to have other toxic metals in them by accident. I mean, there's a study out of Italy recently. They were shocked because they looked at several different vaccines and they found all kinds of toxic metals. Not aluminum was expected, and they found it, but they also found a lot of other things as well, like lead and chromium. But the aluminum is very serious, and they've been adding it as an adjuvant for a long time. And again, it's like the glyphosate. When something gets approved a long time ago, we get complacent about it. And so people don't seem to be willing to admit that aluminum is a problem. But it's extremely clear that it is. And in fact, Exley just recently published a paper where he found alarmingly high levels of aluminum in autistic brains. And this is really a dead hit for the vaccines. He admitted that finally, he's an expert on aluminum. He's written many papers about it. And he's always been somewhat skeptical about whether the aluminum in the vaccines is a problem. And this time he said now he believes that the aluminum in the vaccines is a serious problem causing autism, and it's reflected in the high aluminum that's in the autism brain. And again, I think it's with the leaky brain barrier that's being induced by the glyphosate. So it's all working together. The aluminum-containing vaccines actually didn't have glyphosate in them. It's quite interesting. Those were not live virus. And so it's consistent that they wouldn't have glyphosate because they were not grown on glyphosate-contaminated feed. So that kind of makes sense.
When I came out in practice, it was one child every 4,800 and something that was on the autism spectrum. Now the CDC tells us within a decade it'll be 1 in 2. What's happening that our kids' brains are not functioning right anymore? Can you see a correlation with anything? And the answer is yes, you can. There is a subset of the population, if they carry the gene, HLA-DRB1, if they carry that gene, people are at higher risk, adults also, like flu vaccines, people are at higher risk of having a sensitivity reaction to the adjuvant, to the irritant in the vaccines. So it's not everybody, but if you've got that gene and 30% of the population has that gene, if you have that gene, you're at risk of having a vaccination reaction. So in those people, what the scientists say is caution is advised in how you administer vaccinations. You don't give a newborn child or a 1-year-old toddler 4 or 5 or 6 vaccinations at once if they are that sensitive individual. You give them one and you let their immune system adapt to it, and you go back, you give them another one. You know, for the ones that parents choose are important to give them. But you just don't shotgun in an assault for a system that has the genetic vulnerability to have a reaction. That's good science. That's not fanaticism.
You and I could be exposed to the same mixture of toxic chemicals, but I may become sick and you stay healthy. That doesn't mean that that vaccine that both of us were injected or vaccinated with is good for everybody. And so therefore there is a subgroup of children or adults could be more sensitive to components of the vaccines.
Generation after generation after generation after generation, what's happening as these chemical buildups are going from mama to baby, 2, 3, 4 generations down the line, I would argue that we're actually changing the genetic makeup of our entire species. And why are we seeing autism at such a high rate? I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous to blame the high rates of autism to one individual isolated shot that happens to an individual. No, we're talking deeper than this. If we go at the rate that we're at, 1 in 2 children will be autistic in 10 years. What explains for that? Not a vaccine. We're talking biochemical buildup over generations and generations, and now soon to be 100 plus years, because right now we're at a place right now where we introduced antibiotics in the 1940s, and all these chemicals, the pesticides, just started to slip in.
You know, vaccines have their place. They work well, they save lives. But it's gotten out of control. And a great doctor, Dr. Paul Thomas, has written an amazing book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, which I highly encourage you to read and put in your clinic, teach your patients, teach yourself, because the only thing he really removed was the hepatitis B vaccine. And in his clinic, after vaccinating 13,000 kids, by removing the Hep B vaccine and a couple other tweaks, he's not getting autism in his clinic.
One of the toughest parts for what I do from the emotional standpoint is having empathy with the people out there who have to try to sort through this stuff. It's one thing when you're saying, well, I gotta make decisions for myself. But when I think about the mothers that are out there, I mean, even in my own family, you know, when I talk about these issues with relatives, cousins, friends, who they're having a baby. It's the most magical, beautiful experience that a human being can possibly have. It's also, you're now charged with the responsibility of caring for that child. And to think about the fact that they have their pediatrician telling them that, in essence, you're an evil parent if you don't vaccinate your kid. How could you in good conscience not do this, etc. And then of course they have people like me saying, you need to think twice about this. You need to look at the information. You need to look at the data. Yet now they know they have a certain responsibility. They want to do the right thing. So intent is not at all a part of this. So I will say that for anybody who's watching this, I feel you. I empathize with you. I wish there was an easy way for you to just wrap your head around this. And I'll just say that there's not. Take the time to step up and look at some alternative views and then decide what you think the right path is for you.
I will tell you guys the same thing. I don't know all the answers. I don't know if what I did is the ultimate decision. Is that the ultimate best decision? I don't know, are there ways that you can delay the schedule and be less aggressive and maybe use less vaccines overall to try to reduce the adjuncts that are in these vaccines, these other chemicals? Can you try to space them out more? Can you wait till the kids are older? Is there a way that you can take detoxification and liver upregulating nutrients like milk thistle to help out, to blunt the risk of them? I don't know all the answers, but for us, I decided, based on everything I've seen, I've looked at the ingredient list, this stuff is not good. Am I right for my decision? It felt right for me. So I don't want people to say, okay, I've either got to listen to this guy who's on this side of the spectrum or I've got to listen to this guy who's on this side of the spectrum. I think try to remove yourself from the fear, which is what I did. I didn't want to be afraid.
Vaccines are a difficult thing to objectively study. We seem to be lacking a lot of research into the combinatory effects of vaccines and the subgroup risk associated with any one vaccine. So before we continue to add more vaccines to the schedule, perhaps we need more research. But from my experience, what seems very apparent is that every parent wants the best for their children, and condemning one another for the choices each of us makes doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere. The data is clear though. Rates of chronic immune system issues continue to climb, and if we don't start asking the difficult questions about some of the ingredients like aluminum or contaminants like glyphosate that end up in these vaccines, immune system challenges may be the new norm. This brings us to another modern advancement that may be significantly impacting our health: the all too common occurrence of childhood surgeries. We've become so quick to remove wisdom teeth, tonsils, and the appendix. Is this really the right approach?
So when it comes to surgery, when it comes to removing things from the body, I always say you're not sick because you have too many organs, right? We were created with the exact number of organs in our body for a very specific reason.
A lot of surgeries are actually done because of a lack of understanding of how the body works. Right now, we're kind of stuck in this cut-out scenario because some people get to a point where that's all their options are, right? Somebody's appendix, if it's going to burst, we need to take it out. And the appendix is actually the lymph node for the digestive system. The lymph nodes in the adenoids are basically the lymph nodes for the brain. So if somebody has chronic brain inflammation, and that's what's causing their adenoids to constantly be inflamed, and we take those things out, now there's going to be dysfunction in the central nervous system. We also have the gallbladder, that's removed quite often, and usually the gallbladder is removed because of people's poor diets. Poor dietary choices are what lead to that. And one of the nutrients that you need for healthy gallbladder function is B6. And B6 is something that keeps bile in suspension, but B6 is heavily depleted by chronic stress. So maybe it's chronic stress that's leading to gallbladder dysfunction caused by nutrient deficiencies. So I think that when we gain a better understanding of how the body works, we're able to prevent these problems from happening in the first place. But most surgeries take place because people, they just wait too long, right? And that's the end result of their chronic miscalculation of how to take care of themselves, is they're in this crisis type of scenario.
So we've just been, with surgery, we've just been cutting things, we've just been doing things without really, we're focused on the technique, of how can I best remove this without affecting this, etc., just at the current moment, but we're not actually looking at the history of, should we even cut it? What are the long-term effects of this?
If you have a jaw that is not accommodating the third molars, which are the wisdom teeth, and those teeth are what would be called impacted. In other words, they're staying deep under the bone, they're not coming out from the gum tissue, there's no problem there. There's no problem with the impacted teeth staying there unless there's active disease occurring with these impacted teeth. So I am not a proponent of automatically removing these impacted wisdom teeth just because they're not coming into the mouth. That makes no sense. However, if the impacted wisdom teeth that are under the gum and not completely under the bone are partially coming out, but they're not coming out through the gum. Sometimes there can be infection that starts to break down in that area. Now, if that were to occur, that infection is very difficult, if not impossible, to eliminate unless those wisdom teeth are removed. Now, when you extract a tooth for any reason, especially if there's infection, that infection has to be removed completely. So if the molar tooth, a wisdom tooth has to be extracted, or any other tooth for a reason, the infected periodontal ligaments, fibers, and everything else around the root of the tooth that's attaching to the bone needs to be completely cleaned out so that the natural bone can heal itself. If not, there can be defects in the bone that can stay and it can become necrotic. And some people call that cavitations. And that's not a healthy situation for the mouth, and certainly not for the systemic circulation, because that infection can get into the blood system, just like any infection can leak into the blood system.
Weston Price was a dentist who just asked himself a lot of questions. He said, why are these people getting cavities? I don't get it. Is it related to their diet? And what's the deal with wisdom teeth? Why do I have to pull my patient's wisdom teeth? This doesn't make sense to me. And so through his work, he had a base of American clients that as his dental patients, and he was seeing that their teeth were crowded, that there wasn't space for the wisdom teeth, and they were getting infected and they were having to be pulled. And so he then went around and studied areas in Switzerland. He studied Native Americans. He studied the Aborigines in Australia and some of the other native cultures in and around Polynesia. And so here you have these populations in Papua New Guinea and Australia where they're eating this ancestral diet, yet they've got these beautiful jawlines, they've got fully functioning wisdom teeth, they don't even know what cavities are. So through his research, he started looking at what he called it activator X. He knew it was responsible for calcium metabolism, that much he knew. And he, in studying their, even though they were different diets, he found that the butterfats, the cheeses, the natto, the fish eggs, that there was a much higher incidence of this activator X, that he called it, in these diets. And he felt that, during a deficiency of it during pregnancy in Western cultures, and a deficiency of it in the early developmental years of a child's life, that this deficiency of this activator X was causing the jaw not to completely form, and being the reason why there was crowding in the wisdom teeth. And so then we have to go forward into the 1980s before we recognized that activator X was actually vitamin K2, and it's basically devoid in the American diet. We don't get a lot of vitamin K2 because when you look at where it is, it's in butterfat, it's in natto, fermented soybean food predominantly found in Asia. It's in organ meats. Certain fish eggs have high concentrations of it. So it's basically something in the American diet it's almost 100% devoid, and we are lacking in vitamin K2.
Now the thing with wisdom teeth that's interesting is that, micronutrient deficiencies, which are caused by obviously dietary deficiencies, lead to a crowding of the jaw. So we shouldn't have to have our wisdom teeth pulled, right? I've had mine pulled because I've probably had micronutrient deficiencies. My parents, my mom and dad, they didn't know any better, so they ate what they could afford. It wasn't strategic as far as diet goes. And so we were on a very high grain type of diet. We ate a lot of grains growing up, and so the way the jaw develops is going to be different in somebody who has robust micronutrition.
Our ancestors have food sources where they're getting this vitamin K2 on a daily basis. And so they've got these beautifully formed jaws that have plenty of space for their teeth. So in response to the deficiency, we didn't just completely crumble into this ball of jello that no longer has any bone structure. The body steals it from very specific places. Now, why it's choosing the jawline and doing that is for smarter people than me to figure out, but it's interesting to see how it's consistent, across Western cultures, that when they're deficient in this micronutrient, that where the body's stealing it from is that back part of the jaw.
Fats are very important. Fats that are from pastured animals that are grass-fed and grass-finished, wild-caught fish that obviously are very oily. These oils, these fats, are important because they can contain the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A and K and D and E. And these vitamins are critical for the structure of the entire body as well as the teeth. Vitamin K2 is a very critical factor because vitamin K2 actually helps to make the body deposit calcium where it's supposed to be, like teeth and bone, and not in the arterial walls of the heart. The jaw formation is something that parents need to concern themselves just after the baby is born. And they need to be aware that breastfeeding is critical. If you use an artificial nipple that, for a bottle, and that artificial nipple has a certain shape, that shape doesn't change as the baby is growing. So it may be good for a very, very short period of a couple months. And then it doesn't affect the growth of the jaw. The woman's breast obviously continuously accommodates to the growth of the upper jaw. Another critical element is the pressure of the teeth and the jaw when they're a baby is chewing and a young adult is chewing. There are lots of forces when you chew harder foods. There are not many forces when you're chewing soft, refined foods. So the forces of the jaw actually stimulate the muscles of the jaw, and the muscles of the jaw stimulate the growth of the bone of the jaw and the density of the bone. So breastfeeding and chewing crunchier, harder foods early in life are part of the critical nature of the development of the jaw. When that is not done, then if the palate is not formed properly, the mandible is not formed properly, the tongue doesn't know where to go on the roof of the mouth properly, a variety of issues can develop, and that creates developmental problems with the jaw and also airway problems. We don't have to do artificial things to make our mouths healthy. We just have to do the natural things that our genetic code really wants, and that is eating nutrient-dense anti-inflammatory foods and getting rid of the junk. The reason dental plaque is healthy is actually it is the conduit to take minerals from the saliva and kind of partition it properly to the surfaces of the root that need the minerals because of strengthening the mineral structure of the root surface. So if you were to develop early decay, which would be demineralizing of the tooth itself, your body has the ability, if you're eating the right foods and eliminating the foods that are cariogenic or tooth decay forming, then your body's natural minerals of the saliva, knowing that you're eating healthy nutrients that are getting into your saliva, can actually remineralize the tooth. Now, you cannot grow new enamel. You can't do that. But there are mineralizations that can deposit on the surface of the enamel that harden it. There are mineralizations that will harden the root surface of a tooth that has been demineralized in a natural way. But if you're drinking soda, and if you're eating sugary foods, and other foods that are sucking up the minerals from the foods that you're eating, like a lot of the grains, then you are going to have the inability of remineralizing your teeth, and the decay is going to go deeper and deeper. Once the decay gets into the deeper parts of the structure of the tooth, they probably cannot remineralize on their own, and that is where dental treatment is relatively critical, or you will have an infection in the nerve of the tooth and then create an abscess in the tooth, and then other things need to be done, or you have lots of infection that can spread throughout the rest of your body. If you looked at a person's mouth and they have dental plaque, but they don't have gum disease, they don't have inflammation, they don't have any bleeding, they don't have any tooth decay, their dental plaque is healthy. So if you're not sleeping well, if you're under a lot of stress, if you're over-exercising or under-exercising, it affects the gut microbiome affects the mouth microbiome, and even if you're eating a nutrient-dense diet, if all these other things are wrong, then you're still going to have unhealthy mouth.
From pregnancy to early childhood, this is the aspect of longevity that is often overlooked. A lot has changed in the West over the last 100 years, but one thing hasn't. Parents still want the best for their kids. So how do we take lessons from the past and carry those forward into the future in order to improve the health of our children in the coming generations?
Being healthy in the West is pretty revolutionary, really. And I think that's the problem. Look, my family and I'm a father, I've got 2 young kids. I'm very, very motivated to try and take all the information that I've learned over the last few years and really implement it with my family. Why wouldn't I do that? But it's hard. The reason it's hard is because by doing that, I'm scared that in some ways they're being socially isolated from the culture around them. So how do I bring up my children in that culture, protect them, but not isolate them? I ain't got the answer to that.
And our system right now is not set up to look at the root causes for any chronic condition. Right now, the doctor is saying, there's no evidence to show that works. That's total baloney. There's tons of evidence to show that diet changes work. There's tons of evidence to show that environment matters. It's just that our system isn't set up that way. Our doctors were not trained to understand and know the importance of environment.
Light, blue light in the evenings. So important, but people don't think about it. I've got so many children in my clinic who can't sleep or have got behavioural problems. One of the most important things I persuade their parents to do is switch off their electronic device 1 hour before bed. Almost always they sleep better. Remarkable. That's how important light is to our biology.
And of course, autism has inflammation, autoimmunity, nutritional deficits, all these kinds of medical things going on. And if you don't address those, doing these therapies is going to be far less effective. Now, if you actually paid attention to the nutritional deficits in children with autism, and you paid attention to the cellular toxicity, and you paid attention to all of the microbiome imbalances and immune dysregulation, and then you put those children into therapies like speech and motor development, then you would have tremendous success. I've been cataloging stories of children who were diagnosed with autism at 24 months, at 3, who a couple years later no longer had that diagnosis. So it completely challenges the notion of what autism is. And the families whose kids have reversed their diagnoses, they're the ones who made lifestyle changes. They changed what their child was eating. They changed their sleep patterns for their child. They paid attention to their child's environment, what was going in their bodies, what's going on their skin, what they do every day. Those are the kids who actually were able to reverse their autism and are fully functioning, normal kids, thriving.
There is a lot of these natural processes that we can disrupt, and a lot of the burden, I know, would fall on the mother or on the decision to give birth one way or the other. But each minor decision that we make along the way, from maternal health to actually pregnancy care to postpartum care and all the way to the growth of the child, those little decisions actually contribute to the health of the child as it's growing up.
The more we can protect a diverse microbiome, the healthier our children are. So children who are born vaginally, children who breastfeed, children who are able to experience microbes in their environment from the soil, a natural exposure to a diverse array of microbes is really important for health and children.
There's definitely the hygiene hypothesis where you just make a very sterile environment and that's the best thing for your kid, and that's actually one of the worst things. And even with not just autoimmune disease, but things like asthma. There's a recent study that just showed people that have animals and pet dander and all these things around their house, and they have less asthma rates. Even with kids that are asthmatic. So your immune system gets tough with exposures, infections, antigens, and these types of things. I'm not sure if chemicals are the key thing, but as far as like antigenic compounds, environment, getting the virus, getting a flu, getting bacterial exposure, getting exposure to dirt, those things only make our immune system more diverse, and the more diverse we become, the less likely we are to have an exaggerated immune response when we get exposed to things in the future.
Oh man, you wouldn't believe it, man. I have pictures. My nephew, my little nephew. Sometimes we have to tell him like, just calm down, man. He hangs like upside down, and he falls every now and then. We all did it, bro. Our playground was the mangrove.
I like my kids playing in the dirt. I like my kids being exposed to natural environments that help build their immune system, that if I see a sniffle, if I see a cough, if I see a fever, I don't freak out. I understand that this is their body now, their immune system getting reference and context to how to live on planet Earth.
Well, obviously the way to stay healthy is to maintain a healthy diet, stay away from toxic chemicals, get lots of sunlight exposure to the skin, maintain that. So you're basically strengthening your own innate immune system.
So looking at all those elements, once again, knowing that they've been established for thousands upon thousands, from the beginning of time, in order to benefit the human body, in order to establish longevity, before we even eat our first piece of kale, or exercise, or whatever you want to talk about. These are things that have been established within the human race in order to begin health and longevity from the very start.
It was pretty amazing to walk into the child care center and see these kids that were so self-sufficient. There was so much trust by the educators to allow them to govern themselves. These young kids were responsible for serving each other food, which taught them portion size and patience and responsibility. And even before they were allowed to eat, they were taught this phrase that is common in Okinawa that gives thanks to the food and teaches them not to overeat. So even in an early age, they were being taught how to engage their food in the right ways.
食べる前は何て言ってる沖縄は私たちいただきますいただきますということとパッチーサビラ、でパッチーサビタン終わったらパッチーサビタンでごちそうさま、やはりこれ家族の温度取りの一つもなったんじゃないかな。一つのこれ礼儀作法です。やっぱ物に対する感謝の、言葉が感謝を込めてっていうのがあるさね。でこうやって子どもたちもやっぱりそのね言わせるさお食事は残さないように、こぼさないようによく噛んでいただきますっていうさね。
And the foods that they were eating were so bland and natural and normal. They intended for them to eat plain rice without seasoning, without salt, without sugars, without all these flavoring, because it allowed them to tune their palates naturally. Even the younger kids, they would feed them a little bit more runny foods. And then as the kids got older, the foods got a little more solid. The fish got more solid. The rice got more solid. There was an intention going into the food that they were serving these kids and teaching them about food in a way that we don't teach in the West.
I think that food introduction is really fun. It's one of my favorite parts of that first year is food introduction. There's something very bonding in a lot of cultures about food, and so I think it's an amazing time to teach children not just feed them nutritionally, but teach them about your cultural values around food and about the autonomy that they can have with it. And they learn so many things through food and through those first introductions to food. And foods maybe that even myself, like my babies eat liver and sardines and love it. I can't say the same for myself. Like I eat it, but I didn't grow up eating it. I don't love it the same way they do because I was able to introduce it to them early. And so that was what they knew and they developed a palate for it. So it's just this opportunity to teach them so much without them knowing that they're being taught.
When the kids eat GMOs and Roundup and the traditional standard American diet, they're ADHD, they're flying off the wall, they're violent, out of control, they want to be kicked out of school by the parent, by the school, they switch their diet and it goes away. I asked one person stood up in MIT where I was giving a lecture, she said, within a week, I saw your film Genetic Roulette, changed my 6.5-year-old's diet, completely changed. They wanted to kick him out of school and call him, she told me later, they wanted to label him as disabled, mentally disabled. All went away. She said within a month, I had a new child.
We started posting everything we were doing just on Ryder's fundraising page, and that led to our website now, My Kid Cures Cancer, and we start making videos about Ryder doing all this healthy stuff. And I think for a long time it was everyone just thought Ryder was just this awesome superhuman. Oh my gosh, I can't believe your kid happens to love this healthy food.
Or he'll take supplements, he'll take caps and he's only 4, or he eats salads for lunch. Like the videos that we have of Ryder eating salads have so many like views and people are so fascinated by it. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe it is just Ryder. Maybe he is weird and we're super lucky because he likes all this healthy food. Like, wow, you know, thank goodness. But then Channing, his little sister, like she loves salads and she eats whatever Ryder eats. She watches him.
Salads, yeah.
So now I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe it's not just that we have 2 weird kids. Maybe it's just because this is what they know. And, you know, we're not eating cheeseburgers in front of them and then feeding them a salad. Like they see us and we do have to set the example, which I mean sometimes means making healthier choices than even we would want to make, because we have little people staring at us that are really counting on us, you know, and we want to do everything that we can, that when they leave this house, you know, when they're adults, that you know, this is their lifestyle that they appreciate and they know what it's like to feel good and they want that feeling to continue.
Every single thing that your baby comes in contact with has been created somehow. So how can we move this to, like I said, more simplicity? So like the mattresses that your baby's sleeping on. Well, you know, flame retardants are often used in mattresses and those are neurotoxic. So, you know, how can we find one? Where do we even go to find a mattress that's not going to have that? Your baby's car seat is the same, treated with flame retardant chemicals, as well as just, you know, foams and all sorts of things that are off-gassing. Couches that your baby's probably going to be laying on. Blankets, like is it a polyester blanket? Is it giving off esters? Is it cotton? I mean, even the diapers that they sit on every day, unless you're using cloth organic diapers, you know, they're plastics essentially. So what we're giving babies BPA-free bottles, but they're sitting on plastic all day long. So it's things that really can come into hiding places everywhere. And with babies, they're so small. So the things that affect us, it's like tenfold or even more with babies, because their body processes and getting things out and detoxing is just very different. It's immature and they're getting so much more per body weight.
You realize play and childlike as being you know, virtues that we've lost when you start having children. You know, when you start having kids and you start seeing how they show up every single day and they expect you to meet them in that place. You know, your child will unfold before your eyes and blossom in ways you've never, ever imagined if you will meet them in that zone and play with them, get on their level and forget your important agenda for the day and just get on all fours and start playing. All of a sudden you see the genius in that child. I mean, this is written about in, you know, in parenting books going back like, you know, a century. That if you can let go of the adult in you, then you start seeing the genius in everything.
I've had a big learning. This has been probably my biggest learning year as a parent, if I could be really honest. Because the way I grew up, right, I didn't have consistency and I didn't have like, you know, certain things weren't met. So I thought going into parenting, well, if I just hit all the marks, right? They're safe, they do stuff and they have a good diet and all this. And then I started to realize, and I was also taught, because I needed to seek advice, when in doubt, you're gonna become afraid. And when you become afraid or something goes down, especially like usually around when you have a teenager, you're gonna freak out. And you're gonna freak out because you're scared. And that's gonna probably show itself either as anger or something defensive, right? Because of all your intention. My intentions have always been honorable and good. So, you know, what does this mean? And then you realize you can just love them. As a parent, you have to be willing to just stand there and love them. And when they turn around and say, hey, you know, you have to be like, and I love you. And they have to, you know, turn around and they say, well, how do you feel about this? I love you. And I think for me, that has been one of the biggest lessons as a parent, and accept who they are. Because you have a little baby and you think, oh my God, and then you're going to go to Harvard and you're going to be an Olympic athlete and then you'll be a scholar. And then you realize, like, hey man, they have their own destiny. And that's great. And it may not be what you have chosen for them or what you would choose for yourself. And it's their path. And so beyond that, I just really don't know too much.
Thanks for joining us in episode 6 as we focused on the many factors involved in raising healthy children. You being part of this amazing community is so important to us. We'd love to hear any of your thoughts or reactions to this episode. And don't miss out on viewing the full interviews from our experts and elders. We tried our best to squeeze in as much information to each episode as we could, but with well over 100 total interviews, we were only able to fit a portion of the information into the film. By purchasing this series and becoming a Human Longevity Project Ambassador, you will have lifetime access to all of the full-length interviews, transcripts, MP3s, and the invaluable action plan we've put together just for you. Having this information at your fingertips will surely be a great asset, but what's even better is that you will be directly supporting our mission of reducing deaths at childbirth. A portion of our proceeds from this series will be donated to nonprofit organizations that are saving the lives of mothers and newborns in developing countries. To achieve our mission of helping to save 1 million children, we'll continue to work with various organizations worldwide. Right now, the entire series, all of the interviews, and other bonuses are more than 50% off. Decide which option below works best for you and click the link to join our growing community. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for one of my favorite episodes.